On July 11, 1825, a fleet of French warships appeared on the horizon of a newly independent nation. They carried a document, an ultimatum: pay us 150 million gold francs, or we invade. What I'm about to show you is perhaps the greatest financial crime in human history. These islands, paradise to tourists, prison to history, but beneath the crystal blue waters and white sand beaches lies a secret. A debt so massive, so deliberately hidden, that even mentioning its existence threatens the economic order of the Western world. And in 2023, 15 Caribbean nations decided they'd had enough. They stood before the world and demanded something unprecedented. This is their story, this is the reparations debate, and this changes everything. Chapter 1: The Blueprint. To understand what's happening now, we need to go back. Not decades, centuries. 1492, Christopher Columbus arrives in the Caribbean. Within 50 years, the indigenous population of Hispaniola drops from 250,000 to fewer than 500. The solution: import labor by force. Between 1500 and 1867, 12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships. 40% came here, to these islands. They built an empire, but not for themselves. This building, the Bank of England, founded 1694, its founding capital, Caribbean sugar profits. Lloyd's of London, the world's insurance marketplace, started by insuring slave ships and their cargo. These aren't fringe companies. These are institutions that shape global finance today. Barclays Bank, built on Jamaican sugar plantation wealth. Economic historians have traced the money, $7.5 trillion extracted from Caribbean colonies by Britain alone. This wealth didn't evaporate, it compounded, it built empires, while this was left behind. Chapter 2: The Human Equation. But numbers don't tell the full story. Let me show you what this actually meant. 7 years. That's how long an enslaved person survived in Barbados after arrival. 7 years. Then they died and were replaced, because accountants determined it was cheaper to work people to death than keep them alive. But some refused to accept this fate. They escaped, built free societies in these mountains, and fought off the British Empire for over a century. They were never defeated. Their descendants still live free, and they remember everything. This resistance, this refusal to forget, it's the foundation of what's happening now. Chapter 3: The Receipts. In 2013, a historian made a discovery that changed everything. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, chair of the Caribbean Reparations Commission. He found something British politicians hoped was buried forever. 1834, Britain abolishes slavery, celebrates its moral victory. But there's a catch. They paid compensation. £20 million, the largest government bailout in British history until the 2008 financial crisis. But they didn't pay the enslaved people. They paid the slave owners for their loss of property. And here's the part that should shock you. British taxpayers finished paying this debt in 2015. 2015, your lifetime. Your taxes paid former slave owners while their victims received nothing. The money built this, while the Caribbean got chains and debt. Chapter 4: The Calculation. 2013, Caribbean leaders convene, not to ask, to demand. They assembled economists, historians, lawyers, and they did something unprecedented. They calculated exactly what was taken, 7.5 trillion, from Britain alone, Spain, France, Netherlands, Denmark, Portugal. The total, $24 trillion. And that's conservative. They broke it down. Education, 4 trillion. Healthcare, 3.2 trillion. Infrastructure, 6.1 trillion. Every dollar accounted for. Every need documented. Every demand justified. The wealth gap didn't happen by accident. It was designed. Chapter 5: The Negotiator. Meet Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, and the most dangerous woman to European finance. She's not asking for handouts. She's demanding what's owed. We didn't ask to be brought here. We didn't ask to be enslaved. But we're asking now to be made whole. But she went further than anyone expected. The Bridgetown Initiative, A complete restructuring of global finance to account for historical exploitation. She's not just asking for money. She's demanding the system itself change. The World Bank, the IMF, built on the same colonial structures she's dismantling. And they're listening, because she's not begging. She's negotiating as an equal. This is what leverage looks like. But before we meet the woman who wouldn't back down, I need to show you something that changed everything. 2020, pandemic lockdowns. Most archives closed, but some researchers got special access. And what they found wasn't just financial records. It was a database, a complete registry of every slave owner who got paid. Their names, their addresses, their descendants, the Gladstones, the Blairs, the Camerons, the Bennets. Some surnames you'd recognize, some sitting in Parliament today. University College London made it public. You can search it right now. Type in a name. Find out if your ancestors were compensated for losing their property. And here's what makes it devastating. The database lists slave owners by name, but the enslaved listed only as quantities, as numbers. 300 years later, we know exactly who got paid, but we still don't know all their victims' names. So Caribbean genealogists are doing something extraordinary. They're reconstructing what was erased, finding connections, restoring names, giving identity back to the numbers. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about memory. Chapter 6. The Negotiator. Now meet Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, and the most dangerous woman to European finance. She didn't start as a firebrand. She started as a lawyer who read the fine print. And what she found in that fine print destroyed any illusion of accidental inequality. Every loan came with conditions. Conditions designed to keep Caribbean nations dependent. Borrow to rebuild from hurricanes. Pay interest that prevents rebuilding. Borrow more, repeat. By 2018, Barbados owed more than it could ever produce. Most leaders would negotiate quietly, accept terms, beg for relief. Mottley did the opposite. We didn't ask to be brought here. We didn't ask to be enslaved. But we're asking now to be made whole. But she went further than anyone expected. The Bridgetown Initiative, not a request. A complete restructuring of global finance. Part 1. Emergency liquidity. Let developing nations access funds without colonial-era conditions. Part 2. Climate finance. The countries that caused the crisis pay for adaptation. And here's the connection nobody wants to acknowledge. The wealth from slavery funded the Industrial Revolution, which caused climate change, which now devastates the Caribbean. Same victims, different weapon. Same perpetrators. Part 3 is where it gets revolutionary. Redistribute special drawing rights. The IMF's emergency reserve currency, $650 billion created during COVID, mostly went to rich countries who didn't need it. The G7 got $400 billion. The entire Caribbean? Less than $3 billion. Mottley walked into the G7 summit and asked one question. Why do the people who created the least crisis receive the least support? Nobody answered, because there is no answer. These institutions, built on the same colonial structures she's dismantling, and they're still controlled the same way. Voting rights based on economic power. The US and Europe, 55% of votes. Africa and Caribbean combined, 9%. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. But here's what they didn't expect. India endorsed it. Brazil, the African Union, even France, partially, because Mottley isn't fighting for just the Caribbean. She's fighting for everyone outside the club. This is what leverage looks like. And they're terrified. Chapter 7. The Precedent. But here's what changes everything. One country actually paid. December 2023, the Netherlands announces a $220 million reparations fund, but they didn't do it out of kindness. They were forced. Surinamese communities in Amsterdam protested for decades. Every Remembrance Day, every independence celebration. See, there's something unique about the Dutch situation. When Suriname became independent in 1975, thousands moved to Amsterdam, built communities, became Dutch citizens, which means the descendants of the enslaved weren't across an ocean. They were voting, running for office, teaching, organizing. They became politicians who who couldn't be ignored. Then in 2021, Dutch historians published research the government couldn't dismiss. 600,000 people enslaved by Dutch traders, $12 billion in profit at today's value, and they traced exactly where that money went. The Rijksmuseum, built on it, Utrecht University, endowed by it, ABN AMRO Bank, founded on it. Suddenly it wasn't ancient history, it was current affairs. July the 1st, 2023, the Dutch king formally apologizes. And the money? Not charity, acknowledged debt. That word matters. Debt, not aid. Because debt means you're owed. Aid means you're begging. And precedent is how law works. Jamaica cited the Netherlands in their claim against Britain. St. Vincent used it in their international court case. Barbados pointed to it in UN speeches. If the Netherlands can pay, why can't Britain? Why can't France? Why can't Spain? The precedent is set. And now everyone knows reparations aren't theoretical. They're inevitable. Final chapter, the reckoning. So let me bring this full circle. Remember those French warships from 1825? Haiti paid that ransom for 122 years. The last payment? 1947. That's 21 billion in today's money. Haiti's entire national budget, 1.8 billion. They paid 12 times their current annual budget for their own freedom, and they're still here. Still fighting, still free. Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Grenada, Saint Lucia, Dominica, 15 nations. One demand. Now let me show you the real numbers. Unpaid labor, 7.5 trillion. Stolen resources, 4.2 trillion. Compound interest, 12.3 trillion. But they're not stopping there. Educational deprivation, 4 trillion. Healthcare negligence, 3.2 trillion. Infrastructure never built, 6.1 trillion. $24 trillion. The ask, $97 trillion. The reality, you see what they did there? They calculated 97 trillion. They're asking for 24. They're already compromising, meeting the world 3/4 of the way. The question is, will anyone meet them there? This isn't about guilt. It's about facts. The wealth gap didn't happen by accident. It was designed, enforced, maintained, and it continues today through tax havens, offshore banking, debt servicing. Caribbean nations lose 3 billion annually to tax avoidance. Guess who runs the tax havens? The same colonial powers, still extracting. Different methods. The colonization never ended, but every movement for justice eventually wins. The impossible becomes inevitable when people refuse to give up. And the Caribbean? They've been refusing for 500 years. Look, I know this is uncomfortable. Confronting history always is. But discomfort isn't an excuse for inaction, and neither is time. The institutions that profited still exist. The wealth they built still compounds. The people who suffered still struggle. And somewhere right now, a grandmother in Jamaica is telling her grandchild their family's story. A story that starts in horror but refuses to end in defeat. Because they've fought empires before and won, this story isn't over. It's accelerating. Those warships that appeared in 1825 represented force without justice. Today, Caribbean leaders appear on different shores, armed differently. Documentation, law, mathematics, moral authority, global solidarity. And unlike those warships, they're not threatening violence. They're demanding truth and offering the world a chance to choose justice. The $24 trillion question was never whether they deserve it. The paper trail answered that centuries ago. The real question is whether we have the courage to look at what our prosperity was built on, and whether we'll choose justice over comfort. If this changed how you see the world, don't keep it to yourself. Next, we're investigating climate reparations, because the same countries that built empires on slavery are now destroying the planet. And the bill for that? 3 times larger. The question isn't whether justice will come. It's which side of history you'll be on when it does.